Okay, so we are in the middle of the Mishnah here on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph 31a, chapter 5, a new chapter. So we established that even though there's a dispute between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, whether or not we require two witnesses to inform us that she and the suspected paramour, that's the word we discovered here, paramour, were behind closed doors. We need witnesses to tell us that they were behind closed doors. So there's a dispute regarding that. Rabbi Lezer is saying you don't need that. Even if a bird chirps about it, it's enough. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you need witnesses to tell us that they were behind closed doors. When it comes to testimony that lets us know that they were indeed unfaithful, and therefore the Sotah law is called off, that there was no dispute. Everybody agreed that even a single witness can tell us, even if it's a slave or a maidservant, with the exception of the 5 women who are suspected of hating her, everybody else is believed to say they misbehaved behind closed doors. And therefore, no Sotah and no Ketubah. Right? So the Mishnah is now going to go through an exercise in the logic of how we arrive at that. And first, the Gemara is going to take us down a line of reasoning that should lead us to conclude that you do require 2 witnesses. But then cite to the verse that tells us we don't need those 2 witnesses. But even if we just have one, even a slave, even a servant, telling us that she misbehaved, then the Sotah law is called off and divorced without any ketubah. So the logic is built on the following. What are the consequences of these pieces of information? The immediate consequences. So when she's discovered as having been secluded with this person that she was warned about, from that moment on, she's forbidden to be with her husband intimately until such time that the Sotah water clarifies whether she was guilty or innocent. So it essentially causes a temporary prohibition on her. So witnesses to the event that they were secluded causes a temporary prohibition on her. However, if we have evidence that there was actual infidelity, and now they have to go through divorce, now she can never be with him. She can never be with him. That's it. It's the law. She can't be back with her husband, nor can she be with the paramour. So witnesses to their seclusion causes a temporary prohibition on her. Witnesses to her unfaithfulness causes indefinite or prohibition in perpetuity. So by that logic, the event of her infidelity is stronger, is more strict than the event of her being secluded. Because the event of her being secluded, only temporary prohibition, whereas the event of her infidelity is infinite, is prohibition in perpetuity. So by that logic, if you need 2 witnesses to tell us that she was secluded, then certainly you would need 2 witnesses to tell us she was unfaithful. So this would be a line of reasoning to conclude that we do need 2 witnesses, which would contradict what we learned yesterday, that even a slave is enough. So this is where the Gemara is going. The Mishnah is going.
She's considered need that?
No. She's considered having been unfaithful and the prohibition to be with her husband because of her infidelity.
It doesn't extend to passing her objects or anything like
that.
No.
It's
just a function of
it's a function of it, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Forced separation by Torah law.
Why do they always pick on the women? Why is it always the women?
What do you mean?
Well, most things are with the women. Where the woman does this, the woman does that.
Yeah, we already established that the Sotah water,
just as much as the women.
right? We've already established that the Sotah waters has the effect on him as much as it does on her. The difference is that by Torah law, at least biblically speaking, a man can marry more than one woman. So he has an easier way out, so to speak, if you want to have more than one woman. Whereas a woman doesn't have that.
She's bound to a single man.
Making it legally different. Even though I don't think Torah recommends marrying more than one woman.
Because jealousy is everything.
The Gemara refers to sister wives as tzaris.
Look what happened to
Like a tzar.
Leah and
Yes, I once heard a lecture from Rabbi Emmanuel Shachat, blessed memory from Toronto, who made the case that notwithstanding the fact that Torah allows for men to marry more than one woman, the Torah can be seen as a cautionary tale against doing that. Because every single marriage in Torah that has more than one woman causes problems. Between Sarah and Hagar, between Rachel, Leah, and Zilpah and Zilpah, like David and his wives, and every single story of a man marrying more than one wife is problematic. So one could even read the text, this is Rabbi Shachat arguing, as if Torah says, you can go ahead and marry more than one woman, but have fun trying to make that work. Yeah. So anyway, nowadays we have the Chayim Rabbi Gershom, so we don't. We're bound by not marrying more than one woman anyway, at least by rabbinic law. Okay, so let's see now the Gemara's. The Mishnah taking us through this logic, and then telling us why, as indicated by the verses, notwithstanding the logic, we override that and allow for one witness to tell us that she was unfaithful. So let's see. Shahaya Bedin. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're Lamed Aleph from the Aleph. So go back one page. We're back one page at the bottom and go up 7 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. Yeah, third word. Shahaya Bedin. It would have been right to make the following rationale. Uma. And as we see, considering, im edus rishonim, if the first set of witnesses, that is the witnesses that come and tell us that they were secluded, she'ein oisoisa isa olam, doesn't cause her to be forbidden to her husband in perpetuity. It's only temporarily. She's forbidden to her husband until she drinks a sight of water. And yet, ein miskayemes, we don't establish this event, with less than 2 witnesses. In order for the Sotah law to take effect, which means we need to know that she was actually secluded with some other person without knowing what happened. But we need to know there was seclusion. That event, the seclusion, must be established by 2 witnesses. Even though that event only forbids her temporarily until she drinks the Sotah waters. So by that logic, Eidus Achrayna, a later witness testimony, that is to say, testimony that comes and tells us that she was actually unfaithful, which that testimony would render her forbidden to her husband in perpetuity. Ein Odin, is it then not logical? That it should not be established with anything less than 2 witnesses? Because the effect of that event is much stronger. This is a kal v'chomer, right? It's one of the 13 principles of the Torah derivation, is kal v'chomer, which Michael Chernak taught me is translated as a fortiori in the legal Latin term. How much the more so? If you have something of a lighter nature that requires stricter circumstances, then certainly the more weighty law requires stricter circumstances. So here, the lighter law, that is to say, only temporarily making her forbidden to her husband, and yet you need 2 witnesses to tell us she was secluded, and how much more so, the more weighty law, the fact that she's forever going to be forbidden to her husband, certainly you would require 2 witnesses. And yet we established yesterday that you only need 1, even a slave, even a maid.
What happens to the husband if she goes all the way down to the soda, drinking the soda water?
Yeah.
And she nothing happens. What happens to the husband in that case?
They should reconcile. They should go to therapy and reconcile their marriage, because obviously she wasn't unfaithful and he has unfounded jealousy that he has to deal with.
But biblically, nothing is.
That was the point. She drank the Sotah law. She's healthy, which means she was innocent.
Yeah, but to him, I mean, he said it. Maybe he set it all up.
Yeah, so they get blessing actually in that case. She gets blessed. If she had trouble giving birth, she gets to give birth more.
What happens to him?
What happens to him? He is to.
He contrived the whole thing.
Yeah, so I think it's time for him to go to therapy. I don't think by law he's required to, but I'm just suggesting that he should. Obviously, he's got some real jealousies that he has to deal with.
Nothing happens.
No, she's innocent. There was no issue. The Gemara discussed earlier whether he actually should go ahead and warn her or pipe down. It's a way out if you need it, but calm down. The Gemara discussed that. I guess it would be dependent on the circumstances. But certainly, if she came out innocent, I would, as their local rabbi, send them right to therapy.
How often did it go all the way to Sotah?
So someone once asked that, and we discovered a number of cases the Gemara cites when Sotah law actually took effect. The Medrash mentions a few cases, so it seems like it did happen. I don't know how often though.
It's horrible for the woman.
Yeah, it's not a fun.
Sit there with her blouse open.
It's not. It's embarrassing for her husband too. You have to really be. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so we have this logic that would tell us that there should be two witnesses for the event of their infidelity, because that would render her forbidden to her husband forever. And yet we established yesterday one witness is enough. Why is that? So explain to Gemara, this comes from the verse. Because the verse reads, Ve'ed ein ba. The context of the verse is like this. The law of the Sotah is described in the Torah, of course. And the Torah begins by saying the husband is jealous, he warns his wife, and she secludes herself with this man. And then the Torah tells us we don't know what happened behind closed doors. But how does the Torah phrase that statement? We don't know what happened behind closed doors, which is why she's drinking the Sotah water. The way the Torah says it is, ve'ed ein ba. There was no witness to what happened behind closed doors. Witness, singular. Meaning, if we had one single witness that told us what happened behind closed doors, no more Sotah law because we know she's unfaithful. So even though there is logic, if there was no verse like that, if the Torah just said, v'lo yoda, and we don't know, then we would use logical deduction and say you need two witnesses to establish that there was infidelity. But because the way the Torah frames or phrases our lack of knowledge as to what happened behind closed doors by saying there is no witness in the singular to what happened, that means if we do have a one witness, even one, then we know no more Sotah law. So the verse overrides the Kal V'chomer, overrides the logic, overrides the logical reasoning, and informs us that no, one single witness telling us to show that they were unfaithful is enough. Call Eidish Yeshba, any witness, any testimony. The Eid Ein Ba, Torah is saying, and there is no witness to what happened behind closed doors means any witness. Because any sort of testimony to what happened behind closed doors would mean we know that she was unfaithful, no more Sotah law, divorce, no ketubah. Because the Torah uses the singular. So if that's the case, the Gemara, the Mishnah now says, okay, so let's use a Kal V'chomer the other way. A Chomer v'Kal. How much the more so from the more strict to the lenient? Namely, Le'edus Rishona, we should make a Kal V'chomer to the testimony of their seclusion. Namely, Uma im Edus, now top of the page on Lamed Aleph and Beis 31b. Ma im Edus Achrona. If, as we just established from the verse, testimony to her infidelity, which would make her forbidden to her husband forever, it may be established as prescribed by the verse by one witness. Then Eidus V'Shoina, then the first testimony, that is testimony of their seclusion, which doesn't render her forbidden in perpetuity. It's only temporarily. Is it not logical that it should be enough with one witness? Now, let's do the reverse. If the Torah establishes that such a weighty issue as infidelity, it's enough to have one witness, then how much more so the less weighty issue, the issue of their seclusion, which is only a temporary restraint on her, how much more so one witness should be established, should be enough. And yet we've made this kind of strange, the law is something strange. When it comes to the more weighty issue, her infidelity, one witness. When it comes to the seclusion, less weighty, two witnesses. Why is that? So when it comes to the issue of her infidelity, okay, we have the verse which says one witness. What about when it comes to the issue of her infidelity, of her seclusion? Talmud Sotah comes the verse and reads, Ki matza ba ervas davar. The verse reads as follows. When it comes to the law of divorce, giving the husband grounds to divorce, the Torah just says like this. I'm quoting the verse on the side of the page here. When a man takes a woman, he marries her, and they're intimate. Now, will come a time he no longer finds her pleasing in his eyes. But why? He found in her a matter of indiscretion. So the verse goes on to say, because of Sefer Christus, he writes for her a bill of divorce. And he gives it to her, and he can send her away from his house. This is the Torah describing divorce. So the Torah uses this word, for he found a matter of indiscretion, using this word davar, a matter, as opposed to just saying he found indiscretion. He found a matter of indiscretion, this word davar.
What happens in the case, let's say they're not getting along, or he's overpowering her all the time, and she decides to see a psychologist.
Yeah.
Or she goes for help.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had psychologists, but she goes for help.
Yeah.
And she goes to this office twice a week, and she's behind closed doors.
And he warns her about that guy.
And he warns her about that guy.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
You know?
We had a manager in our office from Guy, and whenever he needed a closed door meeting, he took his shoe off and put it in the lintel of the door.
by Jewish law.
So that
By Jewish law, you have to leave the door open. It's the prohibition of yichud, the prohibition of seclusion. He would have to leave the door open by Torah law. So that would be a problem. On the other hand, if she is in such a situation, then there are ways in which the rabbis can force him to divorce. They have certain means at their disposal, up until and including physical coercion, if necessary. But before then, they would put financial sanctions on him to release her from this marriage. Anyway, okay, so Torah describes this divorce, that he finds a matter of indiscretion. Not just that he finds indiscretion, but Torah adds that word davar, matter. Now this is there to teach us something. Because later the verse reads, with respect to the law of witnesses, it says, al pi shnayim edim yakum davar. At the word of two witnesses, shall the matter be established. Not take two witnesses, but the matter should be established by two witnesses. So the Torah again uses the word davar, matter, teaching us ma'lahalon, just as when it comes to the law of witness. The Torah says it's got to be two witnesses. Al pi shnayim, it says by two. And the Torah specifically uses that word davar, matter. So afkan, so to here, with respect to his knowledge of her indiscretion, pi shnayim, it's got to be with two witnesses. In other words, like this. We have on the one hand, the verse which says a singular witness is enough to tell us her infidelity. That's what the Torah says. On the other hand, we have the Torah saying that when it comes to him finding indiscretion, it's got to be an established matter. And we know from the law of witnesses that established matter must have two. And therefore, the Torah is informing us that in some regard, indiscretion must be established by two. If actual infidelity we already know is established by one, then where do I apply this rule that I have to have two to establish infidelity? Answer, seclusion. That seclusion must be two. And even though the Gemara did this Kal V'chomer, perhaps the logic is something like this. Once you have two witnesses to seclusion after a warning and everything else, so the story is already there.
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
The smoke is already there.
Yeah.
So you don't need that much to tip it over and say, there was fire here. So even one witness is enough. Because so much has already been established by two witnesses. And that's perhaps how the Torah is telling us to think about the story. It's very difficult to think of it this way. Imagine you had to have two witnesses to actually see their intimacy. You'd almost never have that. When is there ever intimacy with two people watching? It's not a common occurrence. So it'd be impossible to ever find something. But two witnesses to see that two people walked into a room together and closed the door, that's not so crazy. You drive by a motel and you see a woman it's some other guy, close the door of the motel. It's not so out of the question. So the Torah is kind of allowing for establishing real suspicion, and then with the slightest knowledge, the suspicion went beyond that, that's enough. And this is what's being established here. On the one hand, Torah says you got to establish the matter of her indiscretion, two witnesses to seclusion. On the other hand, when it comes to the actual act, Torah says even one witness, even anything, as long as you know that there was an act, good enough, because you have the tipping point after already establishing this whole iceberg of real suspicion, considering two witnesses who watched their being secluded. So that's the Gemara's, the Mishnah's kind of mental exercise in coming to this conclusion, which we discussed yesterday. Okay, so the Mishnah concludes with a number of scenarios in which you have contradictory witnesses and what you do. So Eid Omer, you have one single witness, Nitmis, that says she was unfaithful. The Eid Omer, and then you have another single witness who says Loy Nitmis. She was not unfaithful. How are you supposed to know she wasn't? So it would seem, from the way it actually explains it, is something like this. The person says, 3 o'clock on Tuesday, I was there, I saw them do this. And the other witness says, I was there with you at 3 o'clock on Tuesday and nothing happened. So it's not like a testimony to say they never were unfaithful, but it's a testimony to say that what that guy's saying isn't true. So we have one against another. So what do? Likewise, Isha Meres, a single witness, but this case being a woman, who says, Nitmis, I saw them being unfaithful, I saw them being intimate, which we already established, even a woman could be a witness in this case. But here you have Isha Meres, another woman, countering her witness by saying, like Nitmis, they weren't unfaithful. So in that case, what do? The two cancel each other out. You're left with testimony of their seclusion. The Sotah law proceeds. So he says, Shaisa, she would go ahead and drink the Sotah law. Because the only reason to undo the Sotah law is if we have testimony that she was unfaithful. But here, the testimony of her infidelity is being contradicted by another witness. So it cancels each other out. Go back to the original scenario in which we have witnesses to their seclusion. Sotah law goes on and she drinks the water. Likewise, Echad Omer Nitmis, one witness says, I saw them being unfaithful. Vishnayim Oimrim, and two come along and say, I'm sorry, buddy, like Nitmis. You're saying Tuesday, 3 o'clock, you saw them misbehave? Not true. Tuesday, 3 o'clock, we were there, nothing happened. But here it's two witnesses counting. So what do we have here? Again, the Sotah law continues. Because one single guy says, I saw them being unfaithful. Two contradict. So that two cancels this one guy, certainly. If one by one cancels each other, then certainly the two cancels the one. We're back to scenario A, which is we have testimony to their seclusion. Sotah law continues and she drinks. Likewise. But here's the only exception to this. Shnayim Nitmis, two people come along and say, we saw her be unfaithful. Tuesday at 3 o'clock. The Echad Omer, and one guy says, no, I was there Tuesday at 3, and Loy Nitmis, she wasn't unfaithful. So now we have two saying we saw infidelity, and one person contradicting. So in this case, obviously the two are more powerful than the one, and therefore Loy Hashay, so the Sotah law is called off. Because the two say she was unfaithful. So the Sotah law is called off, divorce, no ketubah. So as long as, in other words like this, as long as the testimony that says she was unfaithful can be canceled, the Sotah law continues. So the only way that can happen is if the contrary witness is either equal to or greater than the original testimony of her infidelity. So if it's a single person, one single male saying, I saw infidelity, and then one single male equal saying no, then cancel each other out. Certainly if you have two witnesses come and say to cancel the single person. But if it's two witnesses saying infidelity and one guy saying no, then the person trying to cancel the original testimony is of a lesser value than the original testimony. And therefore we accept that testimony that she was unfaithful, and therefore Sotah law called off because we know her infidelity. This concludes the Mishnah, and God willing tomorrow we'll look at the Gemara as it slowly breaks down each passage and the various different details in the Mishnah.
If this has to go through the Sotah all the way up to drinking the Sotah water.
Sorry?
If this has to go through all the way to drinking the Sotah water,
Yeah.
does she still have to sit there?
The whole proceeding goes through, yeah.
She would say, well, you're crazy.
So she can back out. We looked at she can back out.
I'm innocent, you're crazy.
That's right. So we've established already that she can back out if she wants. So if she wants to, she can claim innocence, right? And if she wants to maintain that innocence, which means she wants to get her ketubah if there's divorce, then she has to go through drinking the water. If she decides not to, then she forfeits the ketubah because we don't know her of her innocence or not.
I can understand drinking the water.
Well, the whole proceeding. She says, I'm not interested in the whole embarrassment.
Yeah.
I'm out. And she forfeits her ketubah because we don't know if she was faithful or not. The only way for her to get ketubah is if we can establish her innocence, which is if she's going to go through with the actual whole proceeding. But if she decides she doesn't want to, she has that right, but she'll lose the ketubah. We've established this earlier in the Gemara.
But it's not the embarrassment. It's not the shaving of her head or sitting there in the nougat or whatever it is. You know, it's a Sotah water that's going to prove it.
Right.
So,
but it's a package deal. You got to go through the whole.
She says no.
It's a package deal. You got to go through the whole thing. So if she decides she wants to back out, she could. She could back out if she wants to. We learned this once that Chana, in the story that we read in the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah,
Yeah.
she made herself into a Sotah so that she can get blessed with children. But through the whole proceeding, the whole embarrassing procedure, and that way was blessed with children.
She wanted it.
That's right. So
Or-
what I'm saying is that there could be a reason for a woman to want it. If she knows she's innocent, she A, wants it to keep her ketubah, B, she wants the blessing. So she'll say, fine, I'll take the embarrassment, but I'm going to prove my innocence. I'm going to go through it all again. She can make that choice. Or she can say, look, I don't want to go through the embarrassing thing, I'm out. But if she does that, she loses her ketubah because we have witnesses to her seclusion, right? So there's real reason to suspect her. So she loses her ketubah considering that she doesn't
The
want
whole
to prove her.
proof is drinking the water.
Yeah. It's a package deal. It's a pretty,
It's really not fair.
it's Hashem's law. What do we do?
I know.
Okay, Eden.
Why make an innocent woman feel so?
But she's not so innocent. She was hanging out privately behind closed doors with some guy that's not her husband after being warned about it, and that's all suspicion. It's not like she's that of an innocent girl. You have to keep that in mind. And on the contrary, she's actually quite a suspected girl, but Torah is allowing her a way out to prove her innocence. Otherwise, she'd be out in the street.
But she still could be innocent.
Right. You know, it's like this. Without the Sotah law, she'd be out in the street. The Sotah law is, in some ways, for her benefit. That if she was innocent, then she has a pathway to prove it. Without the Sotah law, he would tell her, look, I saw you secluded with some guy, and we have witnesses that you secluded with some guy. You're out in the street. You have no pathway to prove your innocence. The Sotah law, she gives you that pathway. It's going to cost her a little bit of embarrassment, but at least she has the pathway. At least there's a pathway to prove her innocence. Without the Sotah law, she'd be out in the street without anything. So the Sotah law works to her advantage as well.
Well, I bear a grudge against that guy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, okay.
almost hire somebody to kill him.
I don't know about that, but I'd definitely send him to therapy. Okay, have a wonderful day.
It's like he ruined her whole life.
Yeah.